Okay, welcome back. It's been about 6 hours since we bulked up our sourdough this morning, and see how she's doing here. You can see it's gotten fluffy. There's little air holes in there. We'll do a little taste test here. Mild sour taste. That's pretty much what I'm after. Here I've got my KitchenAid mixer, and I'm going to get ready to put this dough together. Excuse me. So, see, I'm going to put a little bit of water in here. We'll start with that. This water here is about body temperature. Yeast does all right with hot water. Actually, the more warm the water is, the more active the yeast is. Up to a limit. It does not like temperatures above about 110. This water here is probably close to 100. You can test that, of course, just like you do a baby bottle. Just put a little bit on your wrist there. Shouldn't feel hot. Shouldn't feel cold. So we're right at about 100. This is yeast. I keep it in the fridge. It's kind of a bulk SAF yeast. This is what I like to use. I'm not going to measure this out. I'm just going to put a little bit in there because it's not that critical. It's we've got sourdough that has a leavening effect. We're adding some yeast to it. If you get a little less yeast in there, it'll take longer to leaven. If you get a little more in there, it'll be faster. Actually, generally, the longer you leave it to rise, the better your flavor, because as the yeast works on that flour, over a longer period of time, it develops more complex flavors. A fast risen bread, like Wonder Bread that you would buy at the store, has very little flavor. So that's just water and yeast so far. Now I'm going to add some light molasses. Completely optional. And I made rye bread for a long time without adding molasses. I actually like a little bit of it. It doesn't add much for sweetness. Actually, I don't detect any sweetness for the amount that I'm putting in. But gives it a little darker color. It's got some complex flavors to it, and gives a little bit of early food for that yeast to really activate. Now I'm just going to put on the dough hook, and we're going to give it a little whirl here and just let it sit so that yeast dissolves. And this should just take a few minutes, so we'll be back in a couple minutes. Okay, so less than 5 minutes, probably 2 or 3 minutes has passed here since I put that yeast in the water and gave it a little bit of molasses. And I don't know if you can see this, hopefully you can, but it is starting to bubble. It's a little foamy. You can actually sit here and watch as that little raft of foam there grows, even while you're looking at it. So the yeast is good and active, and I think we're ready to go on with baking the bread, or at least mixing the dough. So I'm going to take this hook off here just so that maybe it's a little bit clearer, and we'll zoom back out again. So I'm going to take this is our mix from this morning. This is our sourdough. We're going to go ahead and put this in there. Remember, this is rye sourdough. We're putting in here. I'm not measuring anything. I've found over the years of making rye bread that really the only measurement you need is your eyes and your hands. So there we go. It's in there. We'll put the hook on and we will do a little bit of mixing. Now hopefully when this machine is running, hopefully you can hear me. I don't know how loud this is going to be, but we'll give it a shot. My machine's got a little bit of a rattle. Hopefully that's not a sign of an imminent demise, but hard to say. It's been a good mixer for me. The only thing about it is I do wish it was a little bit larger. You can't do a huge amount of doing this without having the dough climb up the dough hook and get gummed up in the gears. So if it ever comes time to replace this, it's going to be a little bit of a larger mixer. Okay, so I think now you can see it's starting to incorporate pretty well. It's kind of turned into a pasty mess there. I'm going to stop it. Now here, we've got our flour that we milled this morning. And, you know, I'm just, again, I'm not going to measure it. I'm just going to pour some of this in there. Start building our dough. Now this, remember, our sourdough's rye, whole rye. And this is whole wheat with some flavorings to it. So this is going to be a mixed rye sourdough. In German they would call it a Roggenmischbrot or a Bauernbrot, Landsbrot, something along those lines. It's pretty common really to have a dough that's a mixture of rye and wheat. Rye doesn't have a lot of gluten. It makes a pretty dense loaf all by itself. It doesn't rise very well, whereas wheat does. Rye absorbs a lot of liquid and keeps the bread moist. It's a long-lasting bread. Has good flavor, and wheat and rye together make actually a complete protein, which is an interesting thing. So if you use both wheat and rye in your bread, you can have a nice high-protein bread that's actually a complete protein. You could use spelt, or you could use teff, or any number of other things in here, einkorn. They would all work just fine, but those don't have as much gluten as a hard wheat does. So we're just kind of mixing this together here. Still a little bit wet. Well, quite a bit wet here. So I'm just going to tip a little bit more of this in there. We're slowly going to incorporate this. Now if you don't have a nice big mixer, powerful motor and a dough hook, all is not lost. Breads have been kneaded by hand for thousands of years, and you can certainly do that, and it's not that bad to do. Your hands get a little messy, but it's good exercise. A lot of people actually enjoy kneading, and I've certainly done that before. The key is, don't let anything intimidate you. There's not some secret mystical art to making a sourdough rye bread. There's about 1,000 different ways to do it right, and just a few different ways to mess it up. So just go with your gut, do what you think is right. It's still on the wet side. Now that's another thing. How dry do you want your dough? And again, there's about 1,000 right answers and maybe just a couple that are wrong. A wet dough will be sticky, a little bit hard to work with, but it'll make a nice bread. It'll actually have nice, big, large cell structure to it. You see a lot of artisan breads that have that. It's from being a wet dough. They'll be very lacy when you cut into them, very light. A very dry dough will make a denser loaf. I kind of like a medium dry. It's easy to work with the dough. The cell structure is pretty uniform, so it's good for spreading butter or jam on without having it leak through to the other side. So I'm going for a dough consistency that's a little bit tacky, but not sticky. And but you could go wetter, especially with rye. The key to working with a sticky rye dough is to not flour your hands, but wet your hands, and just kind of continuously re-wet your hands while you're working with the dough, and that'll keep it from sticking to your hands. Oh, we need a little more yet. I wish you could smell this. Smell onions and caraway seed and sourdough. It really smells pretty good. I've just got this going at low speed. If you knead by hand, it's pretty much impossible to over knead a dough. It is, however, possible to over knead a dough in a machine. It does take quite a while to do that, so it's not like it's a real risky operation, but I like to keep my eye on it, just kind of see how it's doing. Oh, it's getting close now. Just keep tipping a little bit in there. Now this kind of bread, it's common all over Europe, even in France, but especially in Germany. They're famous for their rye breads, and all throughout Eastern Europe. We have a great bakery here in town that does Lithuanian sourdough rye. It's a great bread. That's actually where I got the idea for the onion flavoring. They use that in theirs. But Polish, Czech, Ukrainian, Austrian, Swiss, they all make a version of kind of mixed wheat and rye bread. It's a nice hearty bread. It's healthy. Goes well with meats and cheeses and even sweet toppings. Now it's a hearty bread, so if I make a sandwich with it, I generally try not to do 2 layers of bread. I'll just do an open face sandwich with it because it's a lot to chew. I like a good hearty crust on it. You can kind of see where it's climbed up the dough hook a little bit here, and it seems like it's just spinning, but if you give it a little bit of time, it'll settle back down again. There we go. It's starting to ball up on us. That means probably getting close to where we want to be. Still got a little bit of flour left. Tell. I might have estimated this just right. Or we might have a little left over. If we do, that's fine because we can use it to flour our proofing baskets. So while this is going, this is the bowl that we did the sourdough in this morning. I'm not washing this out because this will be a perfect spot to let the dough rise a little bit. With a little bit more yet. You do have to be a little careful when you're pouring flour in there. If you put in too much at one time, it'll kind of shoot up the sides and make a mess all over your counter. There is a splash guard that you can put on this that would prevent that, but I find it more of a hassle than a help. I can kind of hear the machine working hard now. I think our dough is getting pretty close to being about where we want it to be. Well, it's starting to pull off the sides of the bowl now, which means it's gone from being sticky to kind of tacky. So let's see where we're at. Yeah, that's probably right close to where we want to be. So I'm not going to add any more flour right now. I am going to let this go for a minute or two more, just to make sure it's all evenly kneaded. And that's how much flour we have left. That'll be just perfect for dusting the baskets. Give it a little bit more speed here. Sometimes if it's all balled up like this, a little more speed will help break it up a little bit. All right. I think we're good on that part. So I'm going to let that rest for a minute. I'm just going to shove that aside.